Thank you. This is Owen Kruger with Micrometer. I am the regional sales manager for the Midwest here in the U.S. We're really happy to sponsor this session, Ag in the Election, for the Farm Progress virtual experience. At Micrometer, we pride ourselves on a full line of quality meters. They help users manage operating costs, assure environmental compliance, and improve processes as diverse as natural gas drilling and farmland irrigation. They also accurately and reliably measure a broader range of flows than ever before, including many considered immeasurable just a few years ago. No manufacturer has led the advance in flow measurement more than Micrometer. For over 60 years, our application engineers, researchers, and designers have put their knowledge of flow physics and real-world operating dynamics into developing some of the most accurate, innovative, and trusted flow meters on the market. These efforts have been in direct response to customer input. We have created solutions for one-of-a-kind applications and industry-wide challenges alike. The result of these efforts is a comprehensive flow meter line that meets exceptional as well as everyday needs of industrial, municipal, and also agricultural users. From the technically advanced V-cone DP flow meter to the simplest prop meter, Micrometer products are designed to meet or exceed customer expectations. Some of the most popular meters in the Midwest are the prop meter, the Duramag, the McMag 3000, and my personal favorite is the Flow Connect. New to this lineup this year, we have the McMag 2000 and also a smaller size Duramag categorized as a wafer mag. We at Micrometer are committed to developing innovative, high quality precision flow meters for the most demanding liquid, steam, and gas flow measurements for our worldwide customers, because flow matters for all of us. And just remember, better control of operating environment starts with better information. If you would like to find out more valuable information about Micrometer, please contact me or my team at 1-800-220-2279 or visit us at micrometer.com. This is Owen Kruger, RSM Midwest, checking out. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Willie Vogt, Editorial Director at Farm Progress. Welcome to our breakout today, Ag in the Election. It's a timely topic, and we've got two great speakers joining us today. I've got Jacqui Fatka, who's the Policy Editor for Farm Futures and Feedstuffs, and Jonathan Koppas, who is with the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and is the Director of the Gardner Agriculture Policy Program and author of Fault Lines of Farm Policy. I'm going to turn the floor over to Jacqui, who will start us off. Thank you very much for joining us. And if you have want any more information about the speakers, their bios are on the link on this very page. Jacqui, take it away.
We are in the midst of the 2020 election. I can't quite believe that we're here again, but indeed we are. Many of you have probably seen this map before, but what I always remember about this map is how much red there was, and really very telling of the importance of the rural vote. And many of you may have even heard this story too about Secretary of Agriculture Sonny Perdue very shortly after being named Secretary of Agriculture and confirmed. He showed the president this map to kind of talk him off the ledge of withdrawing from NAFTA, and making sure he reminded the president of those people who got him there in the Oval Office. And obviously there's no denying that President Trump has continued to claim his deep affection for farmers over the last 4 years. I sometimes joke that maybe farmers wish he would tweet a little less about him, because sometimes that does have some market implications. But as we saw with the 2016 election, a very different Republican advantage in the rural vote compared to what we saw during McCain and Romney when they went up against President Obama. And so really for Biden to win, he has to narrow that margin in the rural vote. And there are some Democrat groups that have actually come about since this election, because they realized you can't win a national election and lose 30% of any segment, whether it is the rural vote, the Black vote, the Hispanic vote, the women vote, whatever it may be. But the rural vote really rose in importance after that 2016 election. Now, this 9% is a national number, and I don't take a lot of hope in many polls, but it does show that if we saw a similar 10 to 12% spread swing back to Democrats, then it would be much harder for Trump to win in the next election. So we at Farm Futures do a lot of surveys of our readers, and thank you to everyone who's ever filled out one of those surveys that we send out. But we have done this exact question: if the presidential election was held today, would you vote for President Trump? And so in 2016, we saw that number at 72.6%. And then as you see in 2018 and 2019, that those numbers were a little lower. Now, whether that was the trade war or other things that were going on, we don't know. But we do know that in 2020, when we surveyed again in August, that number was back up to a solid 75%. So I would call that unwavering support for the president. And I think we do see that farmers may have had a little bit of reluctance to really give him their full support over the last couple of years because of what was going on. But then as we saw who clearly the different candidates would be, that Trump again became their clear choice. And I think interestingly too, earlier this year in March, we asked whether they agreed with the statement that President Trump's tariffs will be worth it in the long run. And we had 76% of those who surveyed say it would. And then another interesting thing here too, we often ask what is the most important issue for our readers, and the way government in Washington operates is always very, very high on the list, and was 30.6% of the 2016 election. Interestingly, in the August survey, economic recovery, this was the first time that an issue actually surpassed the way government in Washington operates, but as you see, very, very close. So economic recovery, obviously coming out of the COVID-19, that's an important issue for folks. So here we got our candidates, but very different viewpoints and how they would address issues that are important to farmers. And at Farm Progress, we've actually just completed working with each of the campaigns and having them answer 10 specific questions that we formulated in approach to them, and to really find out where they land on some topics of importance. So we're just going to go through, I'm not going to go through all 10, but I'm going to hit the top 5, I think, that are important and kind of cross over between some different ones. And also be sure to check out our websites, your state side, or farmfutures.com, and we'll have those full answers available to you. So first off, trade. Obviously, a very different way that each has handled trade, and a cornerstone of what President Trump has done in his first term. And these responses that are here are what their response to us was in the questions. And Trump said that, if he wins a second term, other countries already know what it means when he says on trade. And he did come through and bring us a phase 1 Japan, updated US NAFTA, now known as USMCA. We are hopeful that China phase 1. And so we definitely saw a unilateral approach to trade from President Trump. When you look at the Biden administration, without a doubt, I would expect he would take a much more collaborative approach to trade. And by his response here too, looking to work with allies. And there's been some criticism on the handling of China, how maybe we could have worked with other countries who had a similar concern about how China was operating to go after them. Another major issue for this election is the handling of the RFS and upholding the RFS, and what each administration would do to continue to solidify that demand. And I know that there's a lot of folks who would really like to see the president stand up and deny some of these, we call them small refinery waivers and interestingly, I was very interested when I saw this response from the Trump administration that they do continue to want to stand on their promise. And if President Trump wants to continue to have that slogan, promises made, promises kept, that he made a promise that 15 billion gallons would need 15 billion gallons. And I did see some reports that maybe they will be denying those waivers. And I think that would go a long way if that happens before the election to solidify some of that support among farm country, because they've really seen corn demand fall off because of the handling by this administration's EPA. Also, though, I mean, the Biden campaign has taken note of this turmoil on the biofuels and has taken a strong stance on the importance of the RFS and that commitment to the rural economy. And we will wait and see if this becomes a more dominant issue moving forward to sway voters one way or another in rural country. Another big issue is climate change and the handling of that. And a key pillar of the Biden plan for rural America is actually trying to partner with folks. But you need to remember that the Biden administration now has Biden campaign. The vice president candidate, Harris, was actually one of the first co-sponsors of the new Green Deal. And so how the government is involved and encourages or regulates limiting the impact on the climate is very different between these two different candidates. And as you can see from the Trump administration, they want to make sure that things are science-based, but also that it makes sense economically. And so, you know, that statement about not resulting in tighter profit margins for farmers, I think is important. And their further, bigger, longer statement also made some notes about making sure that there was continued voluntary conservation efforts and encouraging that, which is some of the pilot programs underneath the 2018 Farm Bill. Regulations, and this kind of goes along with what we could see with climate change, but regulations and rolling back regulations was another cornerstone of the Trump-Pence administration. In the very early days of office, the Trump administration came out for what we now know as the 2-for-1 executive order, which was saying that for every one new regulation, you had to eliminate 2 regulations. And I know early on we thought, how in the world are they going to do this? But they have done it, and they have exceeded actually that 2-for-1 and really taken a deep look at the erroneous and duplicative regulations and made sure that they made sense from an economic standpoint and also did not negatively impact those that was supposed to benefit. So a very different approach than we would have saw under a Hillary Clinton administration. And, you know, although Biden's response was that they will continue to embrace the lessons and experience of experts, it would be interesting to see exactly how the regulatory landscape would change if there would be a lot of changes to some of the things that this administration has been able to roll back within the last 4 years. And the last topic I want to go over is government support, and Jonathan's going to dig into this a lot deeper, but we have seen under this president a lot of ad hoc assistance, and part of that is because of his trade agenda and his loyalty to farmers, and making sure that because of the trade war that they receive what he says here, the dollars and that's under the market facilitation program. And we're also, with the COVID payments this year, another at least 10 billion, although they've estimated it could be as much as 16 billion. So far, we've seen the 10 billion paid out. And definitely the next president too will have to have a farm bill under their belt, and whether they will support continued ad hoc assistance versus more traditional farm bill programs. But as you can see, the Biden-Harris administration campaign response was again going after that chaotic trade agenda and repairing the damage to the renewable fuel standard, which many have pointed at those two policies because of the Trump administration have created this environment that required higher government payments and government support. Both candidates are supportive of crop insurance, are supportive of the Farm Bill program, but we do have an interesting shift in how this, especially what we've seen under MFP and CFAP payments, and who kind of holds the purse, whether it's the Secretary of Agriculture or whether it's Congress, which in the past we've seen a lot more focus be on Congress being able to legislate how the Farm Bill programs would dole out money. But then because of what we've seen under the trade war, and also here within the CFAP payments, it's shifted that to a political appointee at the Secretary of Agriculture. So very important on how they would continue that going forward. And Jonathan can dig into that much more. And so I will hand it over to him. If you've got any questions, you can also read my blog at farmprogress.com/DC dialogue.
All right, thank you, Jacqui. Let me see if I can get the screen sharing handoff to work. There we go. So not to give away the punchline before we get started, I think trying to sort out what farm policy is going to look like in a year from now, let alone Farm Bill time in about 2023, is no small amount of uncertainty clouding this crystal ball. So what I'm going to try to do is put some context and perspective around this, looking back a little ways, and then maybe set up this discussion that I think Jacqui pointed to, which is probably the real big issue looking forward, is just how much of the payment structure is shifted to the administration from Congress and the traditional Farm Bill programs. So with that caveat, I guess, let's see what we can do to search for some clues here in where we may be headed. So this looks at, and then one of the reasons I picked 96, obviously, is the decoupling that happened in the Fair Act in 1996, which pushed all federal farm payments out of the connection to planning decisions and production decisions of farm loans. We decoupled the payments, trying to get away from having too much of the payment influence the planting decision, and particularly in a down market scenario. If we run net cash income from ERS adjusted for inflation and total government payments here, just looking at the area colored in here, the key obviously is comparing at this point in time to the late 90s, when we had a significant amount of federal assistance pushed out to farmers in the wake of the Asian financial crisis, which really hit 1997. Roughly 33.6 billion in payments in 2000, which was about 40% of that income number. If we compare that to where we're at now, we're getting close to that, frankly. If the latest ERS, the 37 billion that they projected in their forecast numbers, that'd take us to about 32%. So, again, the key is that we're getting really close to that level of assistance. Now, a couple of weeks ago, Carl Zuloff at Ohio State, part of our Farm Doc team, we've been working through this discussion of how do we, what do we look for? And one of the things that he put together is this idea of leading indicators. These ad hoc assistance going back over time give us some indication of what comes after it. And so this is a figure from that Farm Doc article, which the link is right there. And I gave Carl a hard time about it. I said, this thing has been like bouncing around my head ever since we first started discussing the article. And I don't know that we've gotten any clearer to an answer, but I keep thinking about this. So let's go back and look at a couple of these critical ad hoc situations. 1983, the Reagan administration, so as the farm economy was really sliding deeper into the economic crisis of the 80s, the Reagan administration in 83 reinitiated a payment in kind program, PIC. And this is one of these, we're going to give you certificates on CCC stored commodities for you to plant less of that commodity. And I'll come back to that in a little bit more in a minute. And that obviously preceded the 85 Farm Bill. So we saw some indication there. We again looked at the late 90s Asian financial crisis, where Congress stepped in and doubled what were then called the AMPTA payments, the 1996 reform direct payments. And because of the low price scenario and the farm economic challenges around the Asian financial crisis, what Congress did was step in with ad hoc supplemental appropriations bills and effectively doubled the amount the farmer was receiving each year. And so you see that high level, particularly in 2000, which we're talking about. And then if we look at where we're at now, and Jacqui mentioned that, we're at a combination, really. We've got Trump administration initiating the market facilitation program in 2018 as the tariff conflict, particularly with China, unfolded initially while crops were in the field. And then the 2019 version where they re-upped it. Both of those, interestingly enough, were reconnected to production. So the 2018 was based on the bushels produced. 2019 had some planting requirement attached to it, which is a complete reversal in policy from 96. And then CFAP is a combination of both congressionally authorized additional funding, the $9.5 billion in the CARES Act, as well as continuing use of the Commodity Credit Corporation to backfill some of the funding. And just, you know, in terms of funding, these are surpassing previous ad hoc levels of funding. So again, trying to think through time frame of this. This is the ERS numbers, again, government payments by category, adjusted for inflation by ERS. So you can trust that it's not my math that's screening up here. How does this look Farm Bill wise? We go back to 83, 84, around that first initiation of the PIC program by the Reagan administration. Fascinating enough, if there's a leading indicator, I don't know that we're getting an indicator that Congress stepped in and did a lot to change policy. The 85 Farm Bill for farmers continued the target price and deficiency payment. In fact, it ended up locking target prices for the first 4 years, and then they had a step down beginning in 89. It was also the Farm Bill that added the Conservation Reserve Program and conservation compliance in the wake of the expanded acreage and erosion issues in the 70s. So again, I don't know that this gives us any clarity on where policy may head in 2023, but I think it's interesting to note that out of the PIC program into 85, we did not see Congress sort of initiate an entirely new payment structure or expanded payment structure. By comparison, the 2002 Farm Bill represented a really substantial shift from what had been passed and enacted in 96. The 2002 Farm Bill reinstituted the target price and deficiency payment program, this time called the counter-cyclical payment program. It added soybeans in, it allowed for a base update, and it was a massive expansion of federal assistance passed by the Congressional Budget Office. It was a huge budgetary shift. And I call this is a budget anomaly. If you remember, the late 90s were a few years where we were projecting or having a surplus in the federal deficit. And so we actually, coming into 2001, the way the budget scoring worked, were showing that there was additional money coming into the federal government than was being spent. Now that was, you know, that changed drastically between the tech bubble bursting in the late 90s, between the 9/11, 2001 terrorist attacks on New York, and the massive tax cuts the Bush administration instituted. It was a very short-lived surplus. But the 2002 Farm Bill was able to capture about $76 billion in additional spending. So here we do see a massive expansion in federal programs after the ad hoc assistance by Congress in the late 90s. But I'm not sure how much we can sort of rely on that given the budget anomaly of the late 90s compared to what CBO is now forecasting as some of the biggest deficits I think we've seen since World War II. So this budget question is probably going to play a pretty massive role in that discussion going forward. And then there's also just this reminder that with that expanded situation, we did run into World Trade Organization dispute problems under the cotton program with Brazil that came out of both the ad hoc assistance in the late 90s and the 2002 Farm Bill, which resulted in changes in 2014 because the U.S. lost the dispute. So kind of mixed bag in terms of what to understand from the late 90s assistance. So it's, you know, kind of walking away from that and saying, well, we're not sure what these ad hoc payments really signal. Let's look at prices and get a sense of a few things. And here I'm just going to note a couple of things, right? There's our 80s situation. We see the price decline running into that PICS program in 83. Again, you see the massive fall off in crop prices. And this is the NASS numbers, monthly average price received by farmers in the month. So this is the market year average that we usually use. I'm just trying to get a deeper look at where prices were moving during these discussions. And then you see the price fall off beginning in 18 under the trade and tariff conflict. But again, a pretty mixed signal as far as what this looks like compared to previous situations, particularly with how much prices fell there in the late 90s. We've seen a price fall off at the high level, not a major one. And then if we look at acreage, here's a much longer perspective. And this is looking all the way back to prior to World War I, to kind of see where our acreage and farming has been or where it is now in comparison. And you can see the gray area is ERS's total crops. And that is on the far side. It's a condensed version to give you an idea of the movement. And then my lines here are each individual crop as reported by NASS. So just a couple things to keep in mind as sort of the differences that we find ourselves right now. The 83 PIC program actually pulled about 78 million acres out of production in 83, and you can see a lot of that in corn production. And it was a major acreage impact, obviously. And the drought in some parts of the country that year also reduced production, kind of helped push up prices. I think the key thing that I take away from the 83 is just the different scenario around acreage. You look at that total cropland number, right? We had just, we had increased above 380 million acres in total cropland in the 70s. And so we're pulling out acres that we kind of, I think there's a strong argument we'd overexpanded in that 70s timeframe. We don't see that kind of acreage situation now. In fact, we are down at the lower levels of acreage in this historical overview. We're down to where we were in the 60s as far as total cropland. I want to think that maybe even a bigger story in this is that if we take these major crops, about 71.5% of those acres are just in corn and soybeans. So our crop mixture is really balanced on two crops and a lower crop scenario. So taking acres out of production, we've had a lot of questions about set-asides and whether that's a return policy angle. And I caution on that, not only the issues with export market and possibly exporting our own production overseas and what we've seen with expansion in places like Brazil. But we're really in a different acreage scenario than we've been in the past when those policies have put into effect, particularly in the 60s and there in the 80s and early 90s, when we'd come out of these expanded acreage scenarios. We're not in that situation now. So how this would impact policy and what this would look like, I think, is a far different question. So now I'm going to kind of reconnect with what Jacqui said a little bit, get away from some of the rough numbers, and just cloud up this crystal ball further so that we're all as confused as humanly possible before we finish this discussion, because why not? It's policy, right? This is this map just is one of the fun, where's the population centers and how the partisan divide. So this is a 3D map of US voters by party affiliation. There's nothing surprising here. I think it ties into or adds some perspective to what Jacqui showed earlier with the Electoral College map. Certainly heavy participation, or heavy voter registration by party differentials between rural America and the urban centers. And I think it's safe to say that is creating a fairly substantial challenge in our body politic at the moment. How that plays out, I guess, is to be determined here in about 60 days. All right, so if we try to get to some point, we'll master the obvious first, right? Let's be clear. There is no historical analog for the situation we find ourselves in right now. I mean, I'm as much of a history geek as anybody, and I've wrapped myself around as much history of this craziness as I can. And to have a pandemic, a global pandemic, and the resulting economic fallout from that, following the trade conflicts and federal farm programs, we don't have an example that equals this. I mean, we can pull from different moments of challenge. In fact, a lot of this has caused me to go back into the New Deal history even further to try to understand what happened post depression and in that scenario. But we just don't have a clear kind of, well, this is what we did this time prior. And that's going to be tough. The MFP and trade issue, as I noted, with the recoupling of payments, raises another set of questions and issues about what we may be seeing pushed because the administration moves so much money through that system, how that pushes Congress in the future. One of the things that I continue to try and make sense around or try to factor into this. We talk about these payments, we talk about MFP and CFAP and everything else, but we sometimes miss, because we use calendar years and crop years and fiscal years, that right now, everything that's going out the door has been focused on one crop, and that's the 2019 crop. We have put a substantial amount of payments on just the 2019 crop, and we will see in about a month ARC and PLC payments most likely for that as well. So this raises to me a question about how that impact plays out. Some of my colleagues have been doing a lot of digging around cash rent questions. Are we holding up cash rents and other adjustments that we need in the local economic markets and the input markets because of the amount of funds that have gone into this crop? I also, I wonder about some of the politics around this. We've seen stories about large payments to individual farmers, but if you totaled up the payment limits for the 2019 crop, that is MFP 19, CFAP thus far, and potential ARC PLC, we're looking at the potential very large infusions of cash at the farm level. And we all know how those stories play out when that ends up to be millions upon millions for individual farm operations and what that looks like. In a tight, difficult political environment, those are the sort of stories that I think complicate a lot of this discussion, frankly. And again, I'm not sure what we think about this recoupling aspect. And the unpriced inventory used in CFAP really raises a lot of questions. We've done some work to try to understand, why, for example, we've spent $9.4 billion instead of $16 billion. And we think initially a lot of this is just an overestimate by the administration that there was a whole bunch of unpriced inventory. And so I look at this from a statutory standpoint. This is a term not previously ever used in farm policy that I'm aware of. So they've introduced a new element here that I'm not sure what that looks like going forward. So what's ahead? I think the simplest answer is we're going to see some more payments. I find it hard to believe in Congress's negotiations, to the extent they come through, it looks to include additional funding for the CCC or for USDA to provide crop payments. I think, just to what Jacqui was saying, the politics in states like Iowa and Wisconsin, they're going to drive the need to push more money out. And the CCC, this administration has used it more creatively than anybody has. And I presume we'll see another round of it. I think the bigger question isn't whether we see payments, but how are they designed? Are they focused on the 2020 crop? Are they reinstituting some things like unpriced inventory or some of these other sort of categorical things we've not seen that really alter that? Some of the concerns we saw with the 2019 MFP was the equity across commodities and whether it was actually dealing with trade losses or there was a lot of design questions there. So I think the bigger issue is if the administration is going to move money out, is it something they do of their own initiative under the CCC? Is there any direction from Congress? And then how does that get designed? And obviously then as we go forward, I think the political outcome in November is going to shed quite a bit of light on what we might see policy direction. I think Jacqui did a great job of sort of summarizing the two perspectives from the campaign, where we might see the political results drive some of these policy outcomes. But I think there's some contrarian answers in there where I think people have put some assumptions that are in their self-interest that may not necessarily come to pass, but we got a lot more to talk about on that. So with that, I will say thank you for having me on, and Jacqui, thanks for including me in the conversation. I enjoyed your presentation, and I don't know, Will, if we're going to do some questions or how you want to go about that, but I will stop sharing now and move it back over to you.
Great, and that was fascinating. And I appreciate both of your insights. I have one quick question for you, Jonathan, and it'd be really on the party shift if there is a change in administration in November. Can either party not write a check to agriculture when they're in power based on what's going on with the economy right now?
Well, I sort of laugh because I've heard this different version of this question. My favorite version is this sort of panicked, oh my gosh, if Trump doesn't win, we won't get payments anymore. And I'm sort of like, well, we've got 85 years of history that both administrations, both parties have not exactly been shy in making payments to farmers. So presuming that the scale of this pandemic continues to impact the economy the way we've seen, and I think of things like these dairy farmers in particular have taken the hits they've taken. I think both parties, I think any President Trump administration or Biden administration is highly likely to continue payments. I think the bigger question is the payment design and how it rolls out. I think you see different priorities between the two camps. I think the congressional makeup is going to be a huge question as well, because what we're seeing now is pretty difficult in terms of dysfunction, and how the changes or whatever changes we may see in Congress and the administration, can they work together to kind of move these things along? So everything from starting a farm bill earlier to the climate discussion and how that may play into the trade negotiations and what we may see. So I think there's a lot of those moving pieces, but if you're making your decision based on payments, I'm not sure you're going to get like one side's going to pay, the other side's not. I don't see that.
That makes sense. Jacqui, anything else you'd like to add after you listen to Jonathan from your perspective? I know that you and actually our colleague Holly Spangler worked with the Trump and Biden administrations to help put your policy program together. Anything that you'd like to add before we wrap this up? You could unmute.
I was trying to make sure I didn't interrupt anyone. I think this election is going to be an interesting one. And this isn't necessarily off of what Jonathan had said, but we've surveyed, in our survey, our farmers don't care as much about what's happened with the COVID response. And I think that that's probably a larger issue maybe for the general population, but for our farmers, and the farmer vote is different than the rural vote. And I think that that is also another important distinction. So when we say 75% of farmers support Trump, that number is not the same for rural. But as I was, I'm working on a story for Farm Futures now, and texting a guy who's actually on the Trump Farmer Coalition. He said that the McCain years and the McCain and Romney nominee did not pull those voters out to vote in farm country, but Trump does. And he has really given a lot of people in rural America somebody who they are glad that he is going into the fighting match to punch for them. And I think as I talk with farmers and even drive across rural countryside, I live in rural Ohio, there's a lot of Trump signs. And don't believe everything you read, don't believe everything you hear. We will see what happens on November 3rd. And hopefully people get out and vote and they're not discouraged too. Everything does matter in the middle. And it's about sometimes discouraging one group of voters not to go and another group of voters to go. And I think in 2016, we saw a lot of farmers motivated to vote. And it'll be interesting to see if we see that same dynamic happening again in this election.
Well, great. Well, I thank you both for being a part of this Ag and the Election breakout session at the Farm Progress virtual experience. There's a lot of good information here. For viewers of this after the premiere, the video can be replayed at any time. There are comments with this, and if you can't comment anymore, but hope you enjoy reading those. We also included a link to the Farm Future story that Jacqui referenced in her talk this morning. And so we appreciate your contribution to this and wish you a great day. And thanks very much.
Thank you.